Hello, everyone. Welcome to Connections with Shawnta Jackson. Connections is our opportunity as professionals to make the most out of networking on LinkedIn and social media in general, make the best out of career advancement and business growth. And I do that by bringing on guests who are like-minded, who inspire and inform. And these are unscripted, unedited live chats for about 30 to 35 minutes. And I thank you for joining me. We are streaming on LinkedIn for the first time. This is my 9th episode of Connections with Shawnta Jackson. So LinkedIn, we're streaming live. We're also streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube. So everyone, please do enter your questions and comments in the chat box and check in and let us know where you're watching from. My guest today is Celena Donahue. She is a health equity advocate, a health equity consultant, and also an associate consultant with my firm, Cause Engagement Associates. We met on LinkedIn and have had the opportunity to work with each other and connect with each other over the past few years. And we recently did a webinar together that she facilitated called The Healthier Path for Native Americans. So we can talk to her a little bit about that. But again, it's all about connecting. It's all about networking. So please do enter your questions and comments in the chat. And at this time, I'll bring on my guest, Celena Donahue.
Hello, you guys. Hey, Young. I am Celena Donahue. Hello, Shawnta. How are you?
Celena, I'm doing very good. I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining me. And like as I mentioned, we have a short time for these chats. You and I, we connected on LinkedIn because we have mutual connections. However, we had never, I thought we did, I couldn't remember, but we've never met in person.
Yeah, I think we might. Did we meet at a conference in Nevada? I'm not sure. Or
so the Nevada Public Health Association.
Yes.
Okay, so and it probably was the Northern Nevada Conference in Reno.
Yes.
Okay, so now I remember. And our mutual connections are other Native American professionals who are in the public health space and also in academia, and then also in cancer prevention. And as I mentioned during the introduction, you and I, we had the opportunity to host a webinar together, A Healthier Path for Native Americans. And one of the things that you did that I really appreciated with the introduction with the guests is you asked, whose land are you on? Could you please explain that to our guests?
Yeah, so when I do a lot of trainings, webinars, cultural competencies, I always ask people, whose land are you on? Because we are on Indigenous land. We are the caretakers of this land. So I really want to make sure that when we're talking to people, we recognize whose land we are on, because we are definitely on Indigenous land. So it's really important, no matter where you are, if you are on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midlands, you recognize whose land you are on, because it is Indigenous lands.
And then also, Celena, you mentioned that there is no correct or proper English term to describe the Indigenous population in this country, and you refer to yourself as Native American. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in one of my trainings, that is a big question, is people always ask, how do you refer? Is it American Indians? Is it Native American? Is it Indigenous people? So we kind of go over a lot of that in some webinar trainings and in cultural competency trainings, because if you think about it, when you talk about American Indians, that is how it is listed in a lot of like the Constitution, and that's how it is in the legal terms. But then when you say Native Americans, you are leaving out the American part, because we were here first. So you're leaving out that part. Then a lot of times when you're talking about Indigenous, what are you leaving out? Are you leaving out that tribal name? A lot of times, when you talk about tribes, are you leaving out, a lot of times there's different tribes and villages. So you're leaving out a lot. So really, there is no correct one term to use. So I thought that is really important to share and talk about, especially when we're talking about trainings, cultural competency. There's a lot of history that goes in that. So really knowing your history.
So what is the best practice? Is the best practice to ask the group
Exactly. So really the best practice is ask that person, what do you want to be referred by? Is it Native American? Is it American Indian? Is it indigenous? So the best practice is always to ask that person what they feel is comfortable with.
Okay. And also, as it relates to best practices, I just kind of lost my thought of training really quick. So as it relates to best practices, or let's take it back to understanding. And so you also, in your trainings, you talk about barriers for Native Americans as it relates to accessing healthcare. And also when you, of course, when you address barriers, you're also talking about historical, not just history, but trauma. But could you speak a little bit about some of the content that you provide your expertise on as it relates to that?
Yeah, so, I always talk about that historical trauma piece so people get that understanding about what Native Americans went through. So, I'm Pueblo Indian. My family is Hoopa, Yurok, and Karuk. So, I do a lot. I'm in California. I was, born and raised in California. So, when I do a lot of trainings and webinars, I do a lot about the California Indians. So, when you understand that history and that trauma piece, when you go back, our very first governor in California had a bounty on killing Native Americans. So understand that history, understanding the boarding school trauma, understanding, what that looks like, understanding intergenerational trauma, that it's just not, it's intergenerational, it's intertwined. But also the piece is, it's not that with that trauma, that it's also healing, that we are now at a point where we want to heal as well too. But really having people understand that. So when we're talking about health and equity, so how can you understand that as a Native American perspective? So we could talk and intertwine Native Americans' best practices with Western health medicine. But you have to be able to understand that trauma, understand that history, and understand those barriers that exist with us as Native Americans.
So speaking of understanding, a practice would be to, one of a best practice would be to use what we call a community participatory approach in community engaged research. And that's working with the community to help them to identify not just their needs, but also their assets and their strengths. And so when you're doing a needs assessment, a standard data collection method is to conduct surveys or focus groups. But when working with Native American communities, is that the same, or is it something different from a focus group?
So yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. So I worked 8 years with UC Davis doing that research. And so with Native Americans, you want to bring in a lot of our culture. So instead of that focus group, number one is you want to bring in our community. So how does that work? So maybe having an advisory board. So you want to have, of course, those experts, but also the community members as well. So having them be a part of that advisory group. Number two is we as Native Americans, we are storytellers. So we do a lot of talking circles. So when we're talking about maybe cancer preventions or tobacco, or, I just did a survivorship talking circle. So we do talking circles. So what is a talking circle? So that is, storytelling is in our blood. That is how we learn. That is how we pass down information. That is how we pass down knowledge. So kind of incorporating that culture. But again, making sure you have that advisory board, making sure you have those community members, and bringing in our culture, and that talking circle is that way to pass down that knowledge, to get those needs assessments, and even talking about maybe some symptoms, some risk factors. So making sure, you use that culture, use that talking circle, because that is our way, that is our knowledge.
And who's the facilitator? So some folks don't feel comfortable if they don't feel that they identify with the community that they're looking to serve. Sometimes it's personal, or it could be maybe just an uncomfortable, not wise professional decision, but some people will make the decision just not to engage with that community because they feel like an outsider or that it's not appropriate. Could you speak to us regarding that dynamic and maybe provide some solutions or some options?
Yeah, definitely. So, I definitely facilitate a lot of the talking circles. So you could definitely contact me. And I always say, especially when we're talking about healthcare, you could be that professional in the Western health medicine, but there are professionals in the Native American community. So find that expert, because that community, so that Native American community is going to relate better to someone who is like them. So you could find that facilitator. And, like I said, you could contact me. I could refer you to someone. I sit on a lot of boards and coalitions. So there are people out there. Reach out. And like I said, you might be that expert when it comes to that Western health medicine, but there are those experts in our tribal communities.
Perfect. And at this time, I will check in. We have a few comments in the chat box. So again, everyone, we are streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So please do enter your questions and comments in the chat box. If you're watching the instant replay, I am Shawnta Jackson. You can visit my website and learn more about me at shawntajackson.com. And you can learn more about my business, Cause Engagement, at causeengagement.com. And we have Sean Dove. Sean Dove is checking in. Thank you, Sean. And Sean is the CEO and founder of the Corporation for Black Male Achievement, and he's also a previous guest. So you can go to my YouTube channel and watch our interview. And Sean, Celena, when you were speaking, he says that he was just having this conversation with Laura Harris and Mr. Ron Martinez, looking elk from Americans for Indian opportunities. So thank you for sharing that connection and that resource, Sean. And I would hope that, so again, this is all about making connections, right? So Sean, if you are looking for someone with a Native American background or of Native American descent, please do connect with Celena on LinkedIn. And then also we have checking in Lynn James. Lynn James is watching on Facebook. And Lynn, her background is in foster care, and she's also a motivational speaker, and she's a trainer for trauma-informed care as well, everyone. So Lynn James, next time check in with us on LinkedIn so we can make that connection and promote with you. But thanks for watching. And then we have Peggy Franks checking in from Chicago, and she's driving. Thanks, Peggy, for checking in. And so Celena, tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Yes. Okay. So my professional background is I worked 17 years in clinical pathology. So I love that science about it. I love seeing those, working in histology, working in pathology, because a lot of people don't understand the pathology behind cancer. So I worked 17 years in clinical pathology. I worked 8 years at UC Davis working on a Mother Wisdom Health project. So I worked with 5 tribal health clinics, and we did a breast health project. I also worked at American Cancer Society in cancer research in the Cancer Disparities Program, and that's where I met Shawnta. And then now I am a health equity consultant. I also sit on several boards and coalitions. I am the chair for the California Tribal Comprehensive Cancer Coalition program. I also sit for the state of California, the California Colorectal Cancer Coalition. I'm also a board member for the Red Medicine Tobacco Prevention Advisory Board. I'm also a board member for the American Cancer Society and several other boards. I've also done a lot of webinars and trainings and cultural competency trainings. Like Shawnta said, I've done the webinar with you guys. We did a 2-day training, which was absolutely phenomenal. I've done trainings with the Nevada Public Training Center. I've done a cultural competency training for the Breast and GYN Health Project. And I also worked with the 1-800-QUITS tobacco line and did a cultural competency training for all of the physicians and coordinators there as well.
Yeah, so we definitely have to, just continue our connection. Everyone, as I mentioned, Celena is an associate consultant with Cause Engagement Associates. And so what that means is that I work with other consultants that have their area of expertise. And when opportunities present itself, I bring them in on an as needed per project basis. And so Celena, this is definitely, I think, just my background with community and stakeholder engagement and the project management, and then also the evaluation and research, and then your knowledge. I think that there's definitely opportunities for us. So anyone, if you are interested in working with Celena and I, please do contact us. Please do connect with us on LinkedIn. And for those of you who are watching on Facebook and YouTube, my LinkedIn screen name is Shawnta Jackson NPH, and this is Celena's name. It's Celena Donahue. Celena Donahue. Again, connect with us on LinkedIn, and just don't connect, but engage with us. Introduce yourself, and let's see if there are some opportunities for us to support each other, serve as a resource or a guide to each other, or maybe even collaborate and partner. And we have Lorinda. Lorinda McKelvey is checking in from Chicago, and she says hello and thanks for bringing this conversation to us. And thank you, Lorinda, for tuning in and for watching. She's a weekly watcher, viewer, and she asks really good, insightful questions. And her background is in health and human services as well. And so she's out of Chicago, and also she's affiliated with the health department in Minnesota. And so she has experience working with not just the Native American community, but also some of the various African immigrant communities as well. Yes. And so how do you manage? You mentioned, I think I heard 4 to 5 advisory boards, and you're also a consultant. And I know you have your personal life and other endeavors that you're interested in. So how do you find that work-life balance?
Yes. So, it's a passion for me, and so working in pathology, I was just in the more hands-on, and I just felt that there was this need in our community. And so it's really a passion, and I think of it as weaving a basket. So basketry is part of our tradition and our culture, and it all weaves together, life, balance, all of our work, it all intertwines and weaves together. So I just try to make sure that how can this all intertwine, and how can we all weave together, just like our tradition and just like our baskets.
Okay. And are there any particular connections that you're looking to make?
Yes, so I know someone mentioned, facilitating, so I'm definitely here to facilitate those talking circles. I'm definitely available to do some cultural competency trainings, because I know that is a big missing piece for a lot of things. A lot of people don't understand that history part, that the historical trauma. And I know we talked about those barriers. We didn't really get to go in depth in them, but there are a lot of barriers when we're talking about health and equity, especially because when you think about it, a lot of our communities are rural. So when we're talking about health and equity, we have a disadvantage, because when we're rural and we're talking about health, how we have barriers. We have transportation, we have weather, we have language, we have cost. So how can we break down some of those barriers? So we didn't even touch on none of those barriers, and we did in our webinar series, of course. But those barriers, how can we as organizations break down some of those barriers? When we're talking about survivorship, how can we break down some of those barriers? When we're talking about a hospital or hospital systems, when someone is at their end of life, we can't bring in our medicines, or we can't burn our, have our little ceremony. So how can we bring in culture and break down some of those barriers? So those are just some of the things that we could talk about and break down, of course, with the historical trauma, the history, the land, a lot of those things. So I think it's really important. And right now, a lot of organizations are talking about diversity and inclusion. So this would be a good time to weave in and incorporate a cultural competency webinar and training as well, too.
For those of you who are just checking in, a training specific to the Native American community. And you mentioned that you are in California. You live in a reservation in California, and so with your trainings, is it specific just to California, or could your trainings apply to tribal communities in New York or Mississippi?
Absolutely. You know, especially now we're doing everything virtually. Definitely we could do those trainings everywhere. You know, I've done trainings, you know, of course, with you with cause engagement. So we've reached so many people. So definitely it's not just here in California. We could get that further reach. And that's what we need. We need to reach further and out and wide and deep.
So in addition to the Indian Health Service, are there any other resources that you would recommend for our viewers who are looking to engage, learn about, and do some research with the Native American community?
Yeah, so we have a National Tobacco Network. We have a National Cancer Network. I interact with a lot of those. So we have National Native American Cancer Networks, National Tobacco Network. So make sure you log on. I will make sure I give Shawnta all of those websites so she could link those up as well. So definitely there is a lot of resources out there.
Perfect. And everyone, again, I'm Shawnta Jackson, and you are watching Connections. And we stream live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So feel free to join in. It's fine to ask any questions or give any suggestions if you want to add to, if you have any value to add to the conversation or any resources, we do welcome that as well. You can learn more about me at shawntajackson.com, and you can also learn about my company, Cause Engagement Associates, at causeengagement.com. Connections with Shawnta Jackson, the event series, the live events are coming soon, and I'm hoping to have my first one in Baltimore in September, and other cities include Chicago, Atlanta, and Las Vegas, and we can add more in, but it's in the works, so stay tuned. Again, connect with me on LinkedIn if you are watching on Facebook and YouTube, and let's engage, and let's share resources to let's be a resource to each other and share resources. And Celena, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you. And this is, I look forward to working with you. I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to seeing you again in person. It's been a long time.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and thank you so much.
Perfect. Everyone have a great day.